You've been in that meeting where somebody asked the group a question and you know the answer or you have an idea immediately, but then you spend the next 30 seconds talking yourself out of sharing it. And by the time you think you're ready to speak, you've either watered it down into something that barely means anything, or the conversation has moved on in a direction that you probably disagree with, but you've spent so much time fighting with yourself that you feel like now if I bring up my idea, it's going to cause the whole team to backtrack. I just won't bring it up. And you think like I need to be more confident. That's not it. You need to trust the signal that you were already getting. And that is the oasis that we're going to talk through today. Hey there, I'm Karin. And if you're holding your breath through a leadership role that you worked hard to earn, this is for you. You got the title, and you know you're capable of rocking the role, yet you keep asking yourself, why does this feel so hard? Welcome to your career oasis. Exhale, because here we get into what's actually going on. I had a staff member on a coaching plan. My manager handed me a tracker, which was a document that it was gonna shape everything that happened next for this person. And when I told my manager that I was gonna share it with her, show her what we were measuring, give her the chance to see it, talk it through, my manager said, "No, don't show that to her." And I literally stopped in my tracks. My stomach went tight and something in me went like, "That's wrong." But my manager had so much more experience than I did. They were higher level, obviously, okay? They seemed very certain, and I just thought, like, I don't really understand this, but they must. There must be something I'm missing. So I trusted their instinct over mine, and I didn't show it to my staff member. And every week after that, I'd open that tracker to fill it in. And anytime it wasn't a clear, yep, everything's good, I felt that same feeling come back. Like, would she agree with this? What would her take on this specific thing be? And I just kept coming back to it. And I thought it was just anxiety and overthinking. But it wasn't. It was my body continually signaling to me that I wasn't making the right move. And when that tracker was eventually brought into a conversation with senior leadership and they brought some things up to her, she had never seen it. So she was able to say whatever she wanted about it. And she did. She made up a story about me. I was retaliating against her. And then I had nothing to stand on because I had built this case without her knowing the case existed. 5 years later, I still think about that moment. I know I made the wrong call, but I actually knew in that moment it wasn't the right call. I talked myself into trusting someone else's certainty over my own. But then I let it go because I couldn't defend the feeling I had. Not quickly. And I deferred to experience and hierarchy. I don't think that moment's unique to me. I think you know exactly what I'm talking about. Maybe it doesn't look like a tracker. Maybe it looks like sitting in a meeting with a clear read on your team, what your team member needs, but then talking yourself out of it before you can open your mouth. Or maybe it looks like knowing the answer to a question before anyone finishes asking it, but then spending a bunch of time dressing it in so many qualifiers that by the time you speak, it barely even sounds like you. Maybe it looks like feeling an immediate no in your chest, in your gut, before your brain has caught up, but then saying yes anyway because you can't explain the no in a way that sounds professional, in a way that sounds like a good reason. So you go with the yes, and the no sticks with you inside you for the entire time that you're engaged in whatever you said yes to. That is what the override loop looks like in leadership. Okay, it's rarely dramatic and it is rarely obvious. It is just a daily practice of choosing someone else's certainty or choosing the appearance of logic, or choosing the fear of being misunderstood over the thing that arrived in you first, the thing that arrived before you had a chance to second guess it. Because you've been trained for a long time, probably, perhaps your entire life, to treat your first knowing as a draft, as something that you have to check, that you have to qualify, that you have to validate and revise before it is valid. The cost of that is not always surface level obvious, right? Like sometimes, yeah, you made the wrong call. You missed something. The decision doesn't land the way it should have. But that's not the cost that I want to talk about right now because those situations come and go. What I want to talk about is what you carry between those decisions. The unmade call from Monday's meeting that's still sitting in the back of your mind on Wednesday, or that conversation that you know you need to have with a team member, but you keep finding reasons to delay it because you're not sure if what you're feeling is accurate or fair or professional enough to act on. So you just keep waiting. And while you wait, you are managing these things in your brain. You are quietly, constantly, underneath everything else you're doing, managing them. And it is draining your energy. The cost of not going with what you already know to be true and what you already know has to be done or said is a total energy drain. And then there is a cost of what it does to your team because they can feel the hedging before they can even name that it's happening. They notice when you add 3 qualifiers to a decision that should have been clean. Those cues cause them to sense, not necessarily consciously, but sense that you're not quite sure. And then they start to fill the gap themselves. So now you're not leading the room anymore. You're managing the version of you that the room is forming on its own. And then there's the cost to yourself. It's the hardest one to trace. It is that relationship of self-trust that you have with yourself. So every time you override your first knowing, that gap between what you sense and what you trust gets a little wider. You start to need more evidence before you'll act. You look for more consensus, more external confirmation that what you felt was real. And then the more that you outsource the validation, the less you trust the signal until eventually you're not sure you have one at all. But you do have one. It just might not look the way that you were told it would. When I talked about the tightening of my stomach in that room, that was mine. It's a physical sensation, not dramatic, not unmistakable, easy to write off. But it was a physical fact that arrived before I had a thought to attach to it. And I ignored it because often that doesn't come with reason. A feeling without justification doesn't feel like enough of a reason to act on it. But intuition doesn't really explain itself. It just arrives, and it'll arrive differently. So we've been handed the one version of what that looks like, the gut punch, I know it in my gut. And that's because about 80% of people do know it in their gut. It's a sudden clarity. Now, just because 80% of people have that doesn't mean that 80% of people have a strong trust in it. And you do have to rebuild trust with any of these. So if you don't have a gut punch intuition, you've probably spent years just thinking that you don't have intuition. That's not true. You just have a different signal. Okay? So for some of you, your intuition might live in how you feel about something over time, your emotions over time. So not the in the moment reaction, but the pattern underneath the emotions. Okay, that feeling that keeps returning, the unease that won't quite leave when everything on the surface looks fine. An example of this, although my intuition is not an emotional intuition, I can share what this might feel like. So, when I got the offer for my director role, I was forced into an immediate yes. At least I felt like I was forced into immediate yes, because there was no space given to me to take some time. I sat across from my manager, I was offered the role, told the salary, and he said, "So do you accept the role?" I didn't have a written offer, I didn't have anything, and in the moment, for other reasons related to my human design and the ways in which I experience pressure, I didn't feel like I could think on it or negotiate. I literally just felt like I had to say yes, and I said yes immediately. Now, I'm a career coach. Obviously, that was not the right call. I also understand why it happened. But as soon as I said yes, he said, "Great." And then he told me an entire plan that was already in motion, who was replacing me in my role, when staff were being told, the timeline was already set. And I found out that I was actually the last to know. There were people junior to me who already knew that I had gotten the role. And here's the thing, I couldn't have told you in that moment what was wrong because I felt excited. I was super thrilled to get the role. But it also felt overwhelming. It felt like maybe I needed to catch up on something. But then that feeling just kept returning and it kept shifting and it kept pointing at something, and I couldn't quite name what it was. It took time for me to see it clearly. That the pressure that I felt to decide without information, that the plan existed before I agreed to it, that the way I'd been moved on a piece of board without anyone even asking me if I wanted to move, that wave carried that information the whole time. I just needed time to see it and read it and think about it and consider it. If you've ever been something that felt exciting and wrong at the same time and you couldn't explain why, it wasn't confusion. Okay, that was your intuition doing exactly what it's designed to do. But you just weren't given necessarily conditions or the amount of time you need to hear it to make that decision. When you're an emotional intuition, you need time to process and to consider it and gain clarity. But for others, it is faster than that. We talked about the gut punch up at the top. It's a lot cleaner. Okay. So before the thought forms, before you weigh anything, there is a response in the body and it is a yes or a no. And it happens before the brain jumps in. Okay. Now, people who experience this have felt this, okay? Someone asks you to take something on, and before you've thought about your calendar, your capacity, or whatever, if it makes sense, something in you has already answered yes or no, or uh huh, or But then you spend the next 5 minutes trying to talk yourself into the opposite. You just responding with what your gut said, that is your intuition operating as it should. That's not impulsive. When you think about it, that's when you override what is right for you. The yes when you meant no, or the yes because you didn't know how to justify the no. Okay, that's all conditioning. That's all the programming. The signal that arrived first is the one that you are meant to trust. For me, mine is a little different than that. It's more of a whisper. And it's not a yes, no. It's a, this is what you should do. It gives me more info if I hear it, but it doesn't repeat itself. So, and that's what happened to me in the room with the tracker. The knowing arrived before I had a thought to attach to it, but I waited and I deferred. I handed it somebody else's certainty. And by the time I came back to look for it, it was like I knew it was wrong, but then the process was in motion. It was just too late. That's also what happened when I accepted the role. I knew I should say no. I wanted like to review the offer. I knew I should negotiate, and I knew it intuitively in the moment. But I still said yes because I couldn't withstand the pressure. If this is yours, if this one felt appropriate for you, you probably don't struggle to receive the signal, but you struggle to trust it because it might feel quiet. You might have not trusted it for so long that you have to rebuild your relationship with it. For others, your intuition actually just lives in your desire. What do you want more? For some of you, your intuition is your own voice when you speak it out loud. That's when the clarity comes. And for others, that clarity, intuition, it comes over time. It's not an instant intuition, it is an over time intuition across days, weeks, months, even. Now, intuition can take on different shapes, but they're all valid. So this week, I want you to notice the first thing that arrives. I just want you to pay attention to the first signal, okay? Before the analysis, before your mind jumps in and starts talking at you, before the doubt goblin comes in and says, "Oh, but what about this?" Okay, before you decide whether it's rational, you don't have to act on it. You don't have to trust it yet. Just notice it. And then notice what to do next. Do you follow it? Do you override it? Do you dress it up in qualifiers before you let it out of your mouth? Rebuilding your trust with your intuition, regardless of how it shows up for you, is going to happen through the mundane moments. It's not going to happen through the huge, difficult leadership decision. It's going to happen with you saying, "Do I want a latte or a cappuccino?" That's how you rebuild trust, is in those little everyday moments. You flex that muscle over and over and over, and then you start applying it to more and more and more difficult situations, and you build the trust within it. It's not a small thing to pay attention to because it's actually the beginning of closing that gap between what you sense and what you trust. If you want to understand the specific shape your intuition takes, what that feels like in your body, where it lives, and probably why you've been missing it, that's exactly what we look at in a one-on-one human design reading. And then if you want to support in real time as the decisions are actually happening, I do offer a week of text coaching integration after every reading. And the link for all of that is in the show notes. Talk to you soon.